Good afternoon, folks. I'm Anna Arison from the LaGrange Library, and I'm here to talk to you about botanical drawing. Now, botanical drawing actually encompasses more than one definition. It's actually three. There's botanical illustration, botanical art, and floral art. Now, floral art is exactly what you think it is. It's art about flowers. We'll mainly be talking about the first two, botanical illustration and botanical art. There is a spectrum between them. They're not super separate. You'll see what I mean. Now, botanical illustration is for education and aesthetic. So, in a botanical illustration, so an illustration of a plant, usually accompanies text illustrating the taxonomy, which is to make sure that the plant in question is placed in the right spot in its order. Just like how we identify different animals in their taxonomies, we do the same thing with plants. Traditionally, it's a 1:1 scale on white paper, meaning that the actual image is the exact same size as the paper. Now, this isn't always possible, see trees, but for the most part, it's 1:1. Originally, it was just done in black and white ink, but nowadays color is also accepted and a bit more common. It's ink and watercolors mainly. They often show multiple parts of the plant at once and can show cutaways or bisections of the plant, so you can see everything about it. From the kinds of seeds that it has, to the kind of petal arrangement that the flowers have, everything about the plant is shown at once. Now, this can be done from a live sample or a dried sample, and it must be anatomically accurate. No matter how pretty it is, no matter what medium you're using, it has to be anatomically accurate. Now, art is almost the same. The only thing that really differentiates them is that botanical art is focused more on the aesthetics and eliciting an emotional response from the viewer, which is, in general, the purpose of art. However, it is a spectrum, because botanical art still has to follow the rules of botanical illustration. The 1:1 scale, the medium, showing, as much of the plant as possible, and the accuracy. This is why it's a bit of a spectrum, because depending on how pretty your drawing is, it might look more like botanical art or more like botanical illustration. It's pretty subjective. Now, there are a lot of advantages to botanical illustration as opposed to photos. Now, the camera sees all, but that's not always what you want. Sometimes the camera sees too much. And photos aren't always the most pleasing. They can be really cluttered, especially if you're talking about a plant with lots of leaves. The illustrator could choose to show you just a little bit of those leaves and illustrate where they are on the branch without showing everything and cluttering the illustration. That would make the composition a bit clearer for you to see, while still maintaining the accuracy of the drawing. And sometimes humans catch what cameras miss. Humans are super cool at recognizing patterns and seeing tiny details. And sometimes when you just take a picture with a camera, those things get lost, especially if you have to make the image bigger. Thus, botanical art and illustration have more leeway in composition and medium. As long as the drawing itself is accurate, the artist can change the composition a little bit, move the image in a certain way so that the viewer, the person who needs the information, so often a botanist, has the information that they need all at once without having to search for it. This has been going on for longer than you'd think, actually. This goes as far back as Egypt. We've been keeping records of medicinal plants for ages. So those were called herbals. They were manuals of medicinal plants, and they were found all over the world, from Europe to Greece to China to India. There are tons in India. To China. There are, it was one of the things that doctors did. One of the most famous examples that we still have, is called De Materia Medica and was made by Dioscorides, who was a Greek physician. This was translated into multiple languages and then copied over and over and over until it kind of started to get inaccurate, kind of playing telephone, if you will. Now, there were a few illustrations in it, and more got added during that time, but few original illustrations would be added before the 1500s. And during that time, things became really stylized. In the late 1400s, woodblock prints were added to printings of De Materia Medica. And in the 15th century, around the same time, naturalism emerged. Now, as opposed to earlier when things got a bit stylized, naturalism was focused on accurate depictions of life, as accurate as humanly possible. And this influenced botanical illustration. As an aside, I specified woodblock prints earlier. This is what they are. A woodblock print is when you carve an image into a block of wood, such that the places where ink is not desired are the places that are carved out. You then ink the woodcut using a roller, so that ink is only on the flat surface, not on the parts carved out. And then this is transferred to paper using a press. This would eventually be replaced by etching, which uses metal and acid and is actually an inverse process. So you draw the image on a sheet of metal that's been covered in a sort of acid-resistant substance. As you draw, that removes the substance. So then when you place it in a vat of acid, the acid burns grooves into where you've drawn, so where the resistant substance isn't. Then after that, you add the ink, but wipe off the surface, so only the grooves retain ink. And then that gets put into a press. Continuing on through history, Otto Brumfell's Herbarium Vivae Econes was another herbal of great influence, and he's said to have brought about the modern age of botany. To the right here, you can see an example of some of the prints in that book. The prints here were done by Hans Weiditz, and he paid a lot more attention to accuracy than we've seen before. And that started a bit of a trend that a lot of later botanists copied, either using those drawings or doing some of their own, but in that style. There were more original drawings and more writing from direct experience. Originally, herbals were written or copied by hand by monks most of the time, and at this point you can copy a book more than once in far less time. This means that the images could be more accurate more often. Botanical illustration and art were also important during the Age of Discovery. Explorers, as they went to new places, collected samples of plants and brought them back. Some even brought illustrators with them. Botanical illustrations were used to catalog samples of the new exotic plants, as well as show off collections of plants that were brought back via expeditions. These tended to be planted in fancy gardens and greenhouses, which is the very beginnings of what botanical gardens are now. By the end of the Age of Discovery, we've moved away from studying plants for medicine and towards studying plants for the sake of studying plants. And further, the dissemination of these books, made easier by the printing press, not only spread knowledge, but also piqued people's interest, which led to more expeditions, which led to more discovery. So, how does this help conservation? It helps conservation in three main ways. It has historical value. We've retained the documentation of plants that we've lost and plants that we might lose in the future. And because we have this information about endangered species and their relatives, we can see how our actions are affecting our environment. That leads us to the second one, scientific value. In order to know how to protect plant species, we need to know what they are and how they operate. And botanical illustrations are vital to the understanding of plants. And finally, it creates engagement. It's much easier to remember, and thus care about, something that you see. This draws attention to things people usually don't think about. For example, do you know any endangered plants in your area? There isn't a lot of documentation on the New York government website about it. It's not well known. And so having this art, having these illustrations, help get people to pay attention to things that are normally overshadowed by pandas, essentially. So, next time you go to a botanical garden, highly recommend the one in New York City when it's a bit safer. See if you can get some botanical illustrations. Some of them might even go towards helping run the botanical garden. All right. These are my sources. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put any in the comments. Have a great day, you guys.